Aboriginal trackers were asked to perform a wide variety of roles when they were working for the police. Chief among them, certainly looking for people who were lost in the bush. Trackers tended to have an incredible knowledge of the landscape, drawn from their own traditional skills of living on country. They were able to read signs, even small little signs that indicated that a person may have passed through there. So a good tracker could look and read the landscape and see the signs, something that most of us couldn't do. But these were skills that had been passed down from generation to generation, and they were, of course, essential for survival, traditionally, for Aboriginal people who were living in the bush, living off bush foods, hunting and catching bush animals. It was those skills that the police drew upon, or asked trackers to draw upon, when they were out looking for people lost in the bush. But there's a variety of other jobs too that trackers were asked to do. Many trackers were employed in the central west and the northwest of New South Wales, those prime areas of pastoral production for the state. And when thieves stole herds of cattle and mobs of sheep and horses, the trackers were called in to try and locate these valuable resources and return them to their owners. There was that economic imperative, I guess you could say, from white society, which encouraged the police to employ trackers. Trackers, aside from their traditional bush skills, though, were also highly skilled in the pastoral industry. Many trackers, before they worked for the police, may have grown up on pastoral stations. This is after the period of frontier violence, and when Aboriginal people, particularly after the gold rushes in 1850, many pastoralists no longer had a workforce to work on their farms and on their stations, and they came to rely much more closely on local Aboriginal people to tend the sheep and look after the cattle. So a lot of young Aboriginal men grew up on pastoral stations, learning pastoral skills, learning how to herd sheep, learning how to ride horses, learning how to break in horses. So it was these skills too that they combined with their traditional skills when working as trackers for the police. I've used a combination of documentary and oral sources in collating information for this tracker project. Certainly a key source from State Archives of New South Wales are the tracker salary registers, or the police salary registers, and the particular pages that were allocated to trackers. After the current police force was formed in 1862, these salary registers were kept to collate information relating to all police employees, including trackers. And trackers' names were listed initially in the districts that they worked in, and also how much they were paid. After about 1882, they also listed the stations where trackers were employed as well. A difficulty with the record is that they tend to just record the first name of the tracker, like Tracker Jackie or Tracker Johnny or Jimmy. In some cases, though, they do record the surname of a particular tracker. And then using detailed genealogical research, we can try and place that particular tracker within known Aboriginal families from New South Wales. That's an important part of the research, is that we can, if we're able to identify a tracker and which family he belonged to, then we can gain a sense of his traditional country, and whether he was working in that traditional country or whether he may have travelled or moved to work as a tracker. So that's certainly generally one of the problems. There's a lack of specific information about the full and complete names of trackers. Another important source is the Police Gazette. It's the weekly police publication which listed people who had been arrested, some of the crimes that had been committed, and these were distributed throughout the state. Many of the stories do acknowledge the role of trackers in particular cases, whether it was capturing thieves or murderers. Again, though, unfortunately, sometimes even the first name of the tracker is not recorded. So there's not that acknowledgement there, which is unfortunate. And certainly the project that I'm working on hopefully will go towards providing some proper acknowledgement for the trackers and their role. Certainly, a cross-referencing process can be useful in providing more specific information about individual trackers. In some cases, if the salary register just records a first name, if I can then, for a particular year, if I can then cross-reference that with a name in the Police Gazette or in a newspaper article using Trove, then perhaps then I can find out a little bit more about that particular individual tracker. Overall, I think it is a bit hard to tell because of the naming practices, but I'd say that there were over 1,000 Aboriginal men who between 1862 and 1973 were employed as trackers. I've been able to build up reasonably detailed biographies for about 200 trackers at this stage, and certainly it's an ongoing process. Another important source that I rely upon is knowledge within in Aboriginal communities as well. And I've certainly been fortunate enough to interview many families who had an ancestor work as a tracker. And sometimes the stories have been passed down from the mid to late 1800s to the present. I was out in Peak Hill about a year ago, speaking to a very senior lady who lives in Peak Hill, and she was recalling to me some of the information about Billy Dargan. Billy Dargan was a tracker who was responsible for helping to shoot and capture Ben Hall back in the mid-1860s, not far from Forbes. And she was related to the Dargan family, and she knew of that story about Billy Dargan being involved in the capture of Ben Hall, even though that had happened well over 100 years before. So certainly engaging with the Aboriginal community is a particularly important part of the project, and I'm always very heartened to receive stories from the community. And there's a great interest, for the most part, from the Aboriginal community about tracker history, particularly when a member of that family has worked as a tracker in the past. I also met last year the members of the Robinson family who live out at Coonamble on the Castlereagh River. And their father, Tracker Robinson, had worked as a tracker in the mid to around the middle decades of the 20th century, and they themselves had built up quite an archive of material of their own memories and of their own documentary research relating to their father and grandfather, which I was fortunate enough to be able to see. Tracker Robinson, who originally came from over towards Peak Hill, was also one of the last trackers to be based at Dubbo in the 1950s as well. So the tracker project has faced similar problems, I guess, to many projects, historical projects looking at Aboriginal history in New South Wales and throughout Australia, in that there is generally a lack of documents, simply because the lives of Aboriginal people weren't recorded in particularly great detail, and Aboriginal people themselves, the fact that they were marginalised, and of course their own culture was very much based on the handing down of oral stories and information. That there's certainly in the archive that there's perhaps not as much information as you would like, and look, as I mentioned before too, the fact that many records relating to the police simply just record the first name of trackers as well. It does make it difficult to build information. But look, certainly by engaging with the Aboriginal community as well, and detailed documentary research can uncover large amounts of information which can help tell, I think, many fascinating stories about trackers in New South Wales and their role in New South Wales policing. And I think that these stories, of course, are very important and significant to the Aboriginal community, but I think they have wider significance to the non-Aboriginal community as well. I think as these stories become more widely distributed, it gives the wider community a much better understanding of the fact that, yes, look, Aboriginal people have and are still present in New South Wales and have made important contributions to the development of the state as a whole. Very complicated and difficult stories at times, but I think nevertheless stories that are important to tell with the assistance of the Aboriginal communities. Jimmy Narang was a tracker who worked around the central west of New South Wales in the late 1800s and early 1900s. His traditional country was around the Narromine district, heading west out towards the Bogan River. And he worked at a number of stations in that time period. He was based at Narromine and Dubbo, but he also went up to Forbes for a year or two and worked as a tracker up there. He after he retired, he lived at Narromine, but he also used to walk out to an Aboriginal station called Dandaloo on the Bogan River, and it was while on one of those walks that he passed away in the mid-1920s. And he was buried in the cemetery at Narromine, and this was information that the wider Narang family were aware of. And over a long period of time, they collected information and stories about Jimmy's role in the police. I remember reading one newspaper account of him giving evidence in a case where a child had been kidnapped, and Jimmy happened to know the perpetrator and was called in to give evidence that helped convict that particular fellow. So this is some of the stories that the family had been collecting, and they felt that even though they knew the stories, that Jimmy's story in particular was worthy of wider acknowledgement in the central west of New South Wales. So several years ago, members of the family approached New South Wales Police. Through their own diligent research, they'd been able to identify the plot where Jimmy Narang was buried, but his grave wasn't marked with a headstone. So they approached the police, and the police agreed to provide a headstone, which was unveiled at a ceremony at Narromine Cemetery in early March 2013. I was fortunate enough to be invited to attend the ceremony myself. It was widely attended by members of Jimmy Narang's family and other representatives from the wider Aboriginal communities of Narromine, Dubbo and Wellington. And the police, the local area commander, attended as well to unveil the headstone. And I think that was an important act of acknowledgement on the part of the police of the role that Jimmy Narang had played in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The Tracker project grew out of a number of factors. It's a subject that I've been particularly fascinated by since I went to school back in Dubbo in the 1980s and heard some stories about tracker Alec Riley, who had worked as a tracker for over 40 years in the town. He was well known to many members of the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities, and I remember my grandmother talking about him on a number of occasions. So I had that sense and that interest in his particular story as I was growing up, and later on, after I'd finished my studies and I was working as a historian in native title, doing historical research for native title claims, I began to uncover a lot more information about trackers in New South Wales. Information that was actually quite pertinent to native title, because what I found was that many trackers were working in their traditional country and using those traditional skills that they had been taught by their own elders of living in the bush, and then adapting them to working for the police. So in doing that research for for native title, I began to build up quite a significant archive of information relating to trackers from around the state. Then in early 2012, I was approached by Ken Girotti, who runs an Indigenous unit within New South Wales Police. 2012 was the 150th anniversary of the New South Wales Police Force, and they were holding an expo at Dubbo to celebrate that 150 years and try and tell some of the diverse stories of policing in New South Wales. And they wanted to include an element of tracker history in that expo, which I think was a fantastic development. So Ken approached me, and I was able to provide some information about trackers who'd worked in the Western area from Dubbo to Walgett and up towards Broken Hill, and that information was included in the expo. And we sat down afterwards and said, look, it would be very interesting perhaps to do a wider project. Support was coming down from the highest levels of New South Wales Police, from the Commissioner. And so we decided that we would approach the Heritage Office of Environment and Heritage to fund a wider project with the aim of developing a website. And we were unfortunate enough to receive that funding. And the 2-year project is coming to a conclusion now, and the website will be launched hopefully before the end of the year. So the aim of the website is to acknowledge the contribution of Aboriginal trackers to New South Wales policing, and record in a culturally appropriate way too, after talking with the relevant families, some of the fascinating stories of individual trackers and the various cases they worked on. An important part of the website will be a map of New South Wales, which will show the approximately 200 stations where trackers were employed, and the user will be able to click on that particular town, and then that will list some of the names of trackers who worked in there, and then you can click on the individual links and read a biography of that particular tracker as well. So yes, look, we're very much looking forward to launching the website later in the year. Ken and I certainly agreed that it's important to try and get the stories into the wider domain. Of course, of great interest to the Aboriginal community, but I think of interest to the wider community as well. And hopefully, the website will go some way towards helping to disseminate those fascinating stories about trackers in New South Wales and their contribution to policing.